Thank you. My favorite part of the week begins, and the shortest class in history. It always seems to go so quickly. We discussed last time the incomprehensible Yeats, the Yeats of mysticism, and the Yeats who goes shopping for images and finds them wherever he can. Today I want to focus upon the entrance into the tower. So today we move into the book called The Tower, as I'd promised. And next time I'm actually going to show you images of the tower when Marcia and I did a field trip over there of sorts, and I read his poetry all over Ireland, and I'll show you some of those videos so that you get to see what it's like actually in the tower. So it'll be good to read that long poem of his called The Tower, and also that book of poems from the tower. So I want to focus today on what it means to be a poet, according to Yeats. And I don't know how you feel about this. Maybe this would be something we can discuss during the question period, but I personally find it hard to read other poets after becoming addicted to Yeats, because he has a kind of project that we will talk about today that is so coherent through his work that when you read other poets, you feel as though they're talking about this thing and the other, but without kind of a universal set of ideas that they're trying to pursue. And that's, I mean, it is the case, I think, with the Romantics, certainly Wordsworth and Shelley and in some ways Byron, that there's a kind of project that you can delineate. But here with Yeats, it really is a clear project that in a sense starts almost from the very beginning of his writings and goes all the way through. The big difference also, I think, between Yeats and the Romantics is that Yeats starts off old. In some ways, he's born an old man. And he is, I think, the great poet of age and protecting one's children and the future against the ravages of youth and chaos. So we'll look at a little bit at that today, this kind of poetic project. And I guess I'll also insist today that all poetry is about poetry. All poetry comments on poetry. And so we'll look at the task of what it means to be a poet, according to Yeats today. As I've mentioned to you, much of the scholarship that I did early on in my life, leading up to a thesis on the tower, was done with Alan Grossman, who I would encourage you to take a look at if you feel the urge. He's kind of a modern Yeats. He died, I guess, 2 years ago or so. By then, he was a distinguished professor of poetry at Johns Hopkins, but he had been at Harvard and Brandeis forever. And I mean forever. I think he must have come out of the womb an old, wise person. And he seemed both ageless and at least 1,000 years old. So he seems like the right person to study in this regard. So do look up, you were just mentioning Chicago. One of his great books is called The Woman on the Bridge Over the Chicago River. So he'd be somebody, in other words, what does the poetic project look like in the modern world? I think that Grossman is a good example. So we'll begin with a poem that is one that's fun to memorize and fun to get to know. It's kind of the coda for Yeats's writing, I think. It's a short poem that's not discussed all that often, but it's one of my favorites. It's kind of one of his endlessly haunting poems. And I think that if you read it as the parent, and that's kind of the theme today, a lot of us are parents, you read it as a parent, trying to think of how you keep meaning alive in the world and what your task is as a writer and what your task is as a reader of poetry. So we'll begin with the Song of the Old Mother. You'll notice that he imagines himself in all sorts of guises. In this case, he's an old mother. We saw him last time in the guise of several of his characters. He's modern in this way. This is not Milton and this is not Spenser. This is somebody who has a modern sensibility, but who writes with very traditional form. So, the Song of the Old Mother. I rise in the dawn, and I kneel and blow, till the seed of the fire flicker and glow. And then I must scrub and bake and sweep, till stars are beginning to blink and peep. But the young lie long and dream in their bed of the matching of ribbons, the blue and the red, and their day goes over in idleness, and they sigh if the wind but lift up a tress, while I must work because I am old, and the seed of the fire gets feeble and cold. So beautiful, so beautiful. I think a poem that we can all read to our children. It's insulting towards our children, so you have to be careful not to explain it too much. But it's such a beautiful image of what it is to be a poet, I think, and it's such a beautiful image of the artist creating. It's beautifully constructed also, of course, like all of his work, and maybe we can begin there. I rise in the dawn, and you notice I rise in the dawn. So both structurally, but also phonetically, the poem does what it says. It's not I rise. You couldn't do that. It's not possible. I rise in the dawn. The other thing that you notice, if he goes, I rise in the dawn, there's a laboriousness to there's a kind of repetition, something that will go on and on. I rise in the dawn, and then she gets down on her hands and knees in front of the fireplace and does the work. I kneel and blow, and of course blow, being at the end of the line, means she blows right into the margin. She blows right into the white space, and it is an indeterminate space into which she blows. So you feel as though that line just keeps going. You just keep blowing and blowing. So it's this constant effort till the seed of the fire flicker and glow. Again, this effort. You make it all the way. It takes you the entire line to get a little bit of a glowing in the fire. So it's a huge labor to bring that. And now once it's glowing, there's a calm, there's a stop, a full stop. We're at the end of the line. We're also at a punctuation, so we can stop. But no, the work of the woman keeps going. The woman stays up. The man goes to sleep after a full day of labor. But the woman, both must labor to be beautiful, which we've talked about. But the woman also must stay awake to maintain meaning in the world for her children and for the family and for in this case, for the whole world. So, and then I must scrub. So this is, one is, as it were, that which you must do. You cannot see without light. You cannot exist without heat. But now you've got a task, a labor. I must scrub. I must. And bake. And notice the way that this is composed. You think that this line could go on for 4 miles, but it doesn't need to. Because you already got all of these tasks. I must scrub, comma, I must fix the computer, comma, can we, there's got to be some, oh, I guess I could just do this, right? Hold on 2 seconds. There, it gets bigger and bigger, and life becomes more and more complicated. He would have hated this thing. Dickens would have loved it, and he would have hated it. So that's okay. And then I must scrub and bake and sweep, right? And the repetition of the conjunction, it insists upon the work that goes into this. You have to do this, and sweep, till stars are beginning to blink and peep into the night. But the young lie long and dream in their bed. But the young lie long and dream in their bed is still 10, but it feels like it's 20, which is so interesting. It doesn't, It seems like a longer line than all the others, but it's not. But it is the length of the night as the children are sleeping. It's something so beautiful. And what they're dreaming of is just completely inconsequential things, which is okay. You know, people need to be children. The matching the ribbons, the blue and the red. Their day goes over in idleness, and they sigh if the wind but lift up a tress. So for them, this is. And then this unbelievable two last lines that I think we can all memorize and keep repeating to our children. So while you all do that, while you're lying there, while the father is asleep, because he's just tired from farming or whatever he was doing, so interesting to begin it with while I must work. And you need a pause after the work. It's almost like you're tired. While I must work, because I am old. And the seed of the fire gets feeble and old. Almost, you're exhausted at the end of this, but you've got to keep going. So I love this. I think it's such a beautiful and never read poem. But like I said, I think it captures the poetic project in remarkable ways. And the rhymes, which are so simple: blow, glow, sweet, peep, bed, red, idleness, tress, old, cold. First of all, they're both extremely simple rhymes, rich rhymes as they're called. But also, they're all, strangely, this is work, they're all visual rhymes. You got low, eep, ed, s, and old. These are not, so you look at it and you know that it rhymes. The other thing we've talked about briefly is that every poem announces a problem that you then solve, or you try to, which is why elegiac poetry is so important. The problem is death. The solution is children, maybe. Here you have the problem. The problem in the world is this need to keep meaning alive. But the end is no real resolution. The resolution is really that you're just slowly losing the battle against chaos and against the cold and against the dark. So this, I think, if there's one poem that captures in just a few lines the large poetic project, this is one. And now we'll come to, for me, maybe my favorite. We're still not in the tower. We'll be there in a second. But the themes of the tower are announced here. And we come to one of the most autobiographical works. And in fact, we come to what really is the beginning of the autobiographical poetry that lands up marking most of his life until the Crazy Jane poems at the end, which remain for me somewhat opaque and mysterious, so we won't get there. But what do you do when your child is born? He makes a prayer for both of his children, his daughter and his son. This one, I think, captures just about all of the central meaning of Yeats in one poem, and I think that I've taken the time before we get here, because I want to make sure that we set the scene. He is in the tower. And the wind is blowing, the roof-leveling wind is blowing towards him. So let's take a look at it. It's astonishingly beautiful. Once more the storm is howling, and half hid under this cradle hood and cover lid, my child sleeps on. There is no obstacle but Gregory's wood and one bare hill, whereby the haystack and roof-leveling wind, bred on the Atlantic, can be stayed. And for an hour I have walked and prayed because of the great gloom that is in my mind. I have walked and prayed for this young child an hour, and heard the sea wind scream upon the tower and under the arches of the bridge, and scream in the elms above the flooded stream, imagining an excited reverie that the future years had come, dancing to a frenzied drum out of the murderous innocence of the sea. May she be granted beauty, and yet not beauty to make a stranger's eye distraught, or hers before a looking glass. For such, being made beautiful overmuch, consider beauty a sufficient end, lose natural kindness, and maybe the heart-revealing intimacy that chooses right and never find a friend. Helen, being chosen, found life flat and dull, and later had much trouble from a fool, while that great queen that rose out of the spray, being fatherless, could have her way, yet chose a bandy-legged smith for man. It's certain that fine women eat a crazy salad with their meat, whereby the horn of plenty is undone. In courtesy, I always want to say it in the Chaucerian, courtesia. In courtesy, I'd have her chiefly learned. Hearts are not had as a gift, but hearts are earned by those that are not entirely beautiful. Yet many that have played the fool for beauty's very self has charm made wise, and many a poor man that has roved, loved, and thought himself beloved, from a glad kindness cannot take his eyes. May she become a flourishing hidden tree, that all her thoughts may like the linnet be, and have no business but dispensing round their magnanimities of sound, nor but in merriment begin a chase, nor but in merriment a quarrel. Oh, may she live like some green laurel, rooted in one dear perpetual place. My mind, because the minds that I have loved, that sort of beauty that I have approved, prosper but little, has dried up of late, yet knows that to be choked with hate may well be of all evil chances chief. If there's no hatred in a mind, assault and battery of the wind can never tear the linnet from the leaf. An intellectual hatred is the worst, so let her think opinions are accursed. Have I not seen the loveliest woman born out of the mouth of plenty's horn, because of her opinionated mind, barter that horn and every good by quiet natures understood for an old bellows full of angry wind? Considering that, all hatred driven hence, the soul recovers radical innocence, and learns at last that it is self-delighting, self-appeasing, self-affrighting, and that its own sweet will is heaven's will. She can, though every face should scowl and every windy quarter howl, of every bellows burst be happy still. And may her bridegroom bring her to a house where all is accustomed, ceremonious, for arrogance and hatred are the wares peddled in the thoroughfares. How, but in custom and in ceremony, are innocence and beauty born. Ceremony is a name for the rich horn, and custom for the spreading laurel tree. So you've seen most of these themes developed already, and now he brings it to bear in one long plea on behalf of his daughter. So to me, and this is where so much of what we've talked about comes all together, this seems like a very anti-modern work, right? You're rooting meaning and belief and substance in custom, in tradition, in that which has worked up until now in the world. So this is, in a sense, an arch-conservative in the 18th century sense, as in conserving values that matter, poem, it would seem. And he brings out those values that have had eternal truck through history, as the protection against the angry wind. But at the same time, there's also a kind of respect here. His insistence upon the rejection of ideas of hatred and kind of false class consciousness is also present. And that's, Yeats is enormously complex politically, it seems to me. This is a very traditional plea. This is something that you would read from an old family. But at the same time, it's not just that. In the same way that Yeats can be associated in some of his beliefs with a kind of early fascism, but so too is he associated with a kind of nostalgia, associated with nationalism. But at the same time, both his actions and his words also speak to a kind of respect for people's differences in the world. So he's an enormously complicated person. And for somebody who's interested in the modern world, it's easy to perhaps write off somebody like Yeats as representing a world that no longer does exist and no longer should exist. But especially as you saw last time, it's way more complicated than that, and it's a lot more interesting. So we begin just to highlight a few moments in here that relate directly to the things that we've talked about. He is literally, and you'll see this next time when I show you the videos, he's literally sitting in this tower. And what he's describing, Gregory's Wood and One Bare Hill, are right near the tower. So this is his own neighborhood that he's describing, and it's quite exact, as you'll see from the video. And the wind does blow along, and he's got the same problem that he had in our first class, which is he can't, in a sense, he has to solve a problem before going to bed, right? Which is what we saw with the death of Major Robert Gregory. So what he does is he walks around, he walks and prays. It's another nice description of poetry. I've walked and I've prayed. He just keeps walking and building lines to try to figure out this impossible problem, which is what do you do with your child? What do you want for your child? And the laboriousness of the previous poem is also present. And for an hour I have walked and prayed. For an hour I walked and he's a working man. She was a working woman on her hands and knees, blowing on the fire. He's a working man. He's making lines. And I think that there's an equivalence here to be made, and it's again one of these consistencies. For an hour I walked and prayed because of the great gloom that is in my mind. Now you know that this guy's not lacking for words, but he repeats himself 2 lines later. For an hour I walked and prayed, so the passage of time, and then he announces what he's doing, and it goes right into the margin, into the white space. Because of the great gloom that is in my mind, I have walked and prayed. He starts again, this time at the beginning of the line. So the constant work. For this young child an hour, and heard the sea wind scream upon the tower. So as he's doing it, the threat is out there. The threat, the chaos, meaninglessness. So the previous threat to children was darkness and cold. And now the threat is wind. This poem is years and years later, but the themes remain consistent all the way through his work. It's so amazing. And under the arches of the bridge and scream in the elms above the flooded stream. And now imagining an excited reverie. This may recall another one that we saw. What rough beast, his hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born, we read last time. So now you've got imagining an excited reverie that the future years had come dancing to a frenzied drum out of the murderous innocence of the sea. Now notice also, just because it's so fun to do these, to pay careful attention to everything with him. We go up to the 3rd line from the top here. I have walked and prayed for this young child an hour. He's been so consistent with the 10 beat lines. And there's really nothing you can do here. I have walked and prayed for this young child an hour. You can't do any ellipses here. It's not one where you could find a way to do a contraction. That's not a mistake. He didn't stop learning how to count. He's so obsessive about everything that you have to know that this is here for a reason. 10 is in poetry, no matter how long the line, 10 is the norm. 10 is perfection. 10 is your body. 10 is an accord between the self and God. If you go to 11, there's something wrong, or overly right in the case of Walt Whitman. I sing a song to myself and it goes on for 24 because I so exceed 10. Here. And heard the sea winds scream upon the tower. And you think, wait a second. There is, in fact, a excess. It's like a kind of excess of the wind that's here. And then you have these much shorter looking lines. Imagining in excited reverie. So he has shifted to the 11. But in what looks to be a very compact line. So there's a kind of compact chaos inside of a much shorter looking line. So as you're reading, you think there's the visual side, there's the semantic side, and there's the phonetic side, and you have to do them all at the same time. Otherwise, we're missing out, because he's using all the tools in the toolbox. Now, the murderous innocence of the sea is also, I think, notable here. The sea is very present in Ireland, as are the storms that come in. But the sea is also the place, it's an indeterminate space. You may remember that Agamemnon is murdered in his bathtub in the great play from ancient Greece. And I don't know if you remember the play, but before he's murdered, his wife, who has a lover and is planning on killing him so that she can live with her lover, says, "Come, my darling, you've been away for 10 years fighting the Trojan War. Walk upon this carpet. I have laid out this carpet for you, and will bring you to your bath." And he says, "No, I've been away from my land for so long, I need to get down on my knees and kiss the soil." And she says, "Do that later." And he says, "This is my land. I've been dreaming of my land." And she said, "Do me a favor. Walk along the carpet and come into the bath." So he walks along the carpet and goes into the bath where he's murdered, which means, in a sense, he never left the sea. He never got back to his homeland and is killed before he's able to touch earth. That says something, I think, about our conception of what the sea represents. Being buried at sea, being thrown overboard, is something that's scary for us because you land up in this indeterminate space. So he's picking up on a lot of these very traditional tropes, as always. This being, I think, one very particularly beautiful. Now, beauty is a problem for him, as you know, because he both is in the business of beauty. His lines are beautiful, and he must, you remember the line, women must labor to be beautiful, except Marcia. Women must labor to be beautiful. So there's a constant, and you're fighting the entropy of the universe. You're fighting the chaos that brings us all eventually down. So that would seem, therefore, to be an obsessive desire on his part. But instead, and we know this because Maud Gonne was the most beautiful woman in Ireland, that only focusing upon beauty is problematic. That level of superficiality poses a risk in the world, just as it posed, and you notice that there's often references to the ancient world, just as it posed for Helen of Troy. Helen, the most beautiful woman in the empire, her beauty, in a sense, leads to the destruction of all of Greece. So the link that's being made here is between this Irish society, which is also under siege, under threat. So again, we could do another class on the politics of Yeats, but he's building walls to protect himself, to protect Ireland from the ravages of the sea, but also from the ravages of England, from the ravages of imperialism, from the ravages of a modern world, and so forth and so on. So the tower becomes a very powerful emblem far beyond what we've seen here. He also chooses, and I mentioned it briefly here, but we forget perhaps to tell this to our children, that we should have them raised in courtesy. And again, if you've studied Chaucer, you know that the dictionary entry under courtesy is about 11 pages long. Courtesy is what knights are trained in, but in the medieval world, in the Middle Ages, courtesy is one of the highest of all desirable traits. And it comes alongside of all sorts of other, it brings with it responsibility, sense of history, compassion, truth, and so forth and so on. It's interesting that he would choose courtesy. That's his chief objective, to teach it to her. Now you notice also, and again, this is, poetry is always about poetry, he is standing in front of his child and he's speaking these words. It's like the magic of poetry is that the words somehow, at least this is the hope, this is the belief, this is the dream, that the words will accomplish their goal. So when you bury somebody, you read an elegy in the hope that it will somehow help you to send that person into the world, into another world, whatever you wish. That the job, your task in an elegiac poem is to use words to solve the problem of death. Here he's using words to solve the problem of life. What kind of life do you have? So it's a prayer, it's a wish, it's a dream that happens in language. So again, nothing could be more traditional in terms of thinking about poetry. The end of, well, we'll get to the end here. May she become, and again, this is where I think it's so beautiful and somewhat more complex than just, you got to do what society has always done. He takes his images from nature. May she become a flourishing, hidden tree. So the tree, of course, is the great symbol of the solid-rooted individual, but it's also the symbol of family. It's also the symbol of, the tree drops its branches, which then fertilize the tree. We need to teach contemporary consumer culture something about this. Right? The horse poops, and the poop feeds the grass, which then feeds the horse, so the horse poops, so we can feed the grass. And the tree is the same way. Now that we bought this farm, I'm so aware of this. The tree just keeps dropping branches that then slowly decay that feed the tree. So the image here is one of constant renewal, and that's what he's shooting for. And of course, the poem is about renewal. And the reason why you write a poem like this is the same reason why you inscribe somebody's name in cement when they die, because it has to outlast normal life. That's why there's so much work put into the poem. And have no business but dispensing round their magnanimities of sound, nor but in merriment begin a chase, nor but in merriment a quarrel. I love that also. That's going to be your motivating factor. So there's a kind of plea here for not only tradition and so forth, but also for this kindness, this gentleness, this sweetness, this generosity that's all the way through here. And then one of the great, I think, endings of poems in the language. Oh, may she live like some green laurel, rooted in one dear, perpetual place. Then he goes on, so you feel as though it's over, but then he goes inside. Now he's going to come into his own mind here. Fascinating. And it is yet another example of him talking about aging. And he is the poet, particularly beginning in Michael Robartes and the Dancer, and in the book that we're moving towards now, The Tower, obsessed by age. And obsessed by trying to establish in a world in which you age a way to remain perpetual. which we're all doing, as you know. That's what we're doing here. Certainly what I'm doing here anyway, but and he, I mean, it's fun. We've talked about the Beat generation and how incredibly autobiographical they are. It's in fact a characteristic of a lot of the modern poems and poets, is that they're deeply autobiographical. You need to know about him. You need to know his friends. You know, we buried some of his friends in the tower the other day. We know about his lover, or his hopeful lover, unfulfilled, Maud Gonne. We know about his children. So he kind of sends out this prayer and then thinks about himself and this kind of deep contemplation. And then this, again, we come back in a sense to the same conclusion we just drew. We come back to yet another ending of the poem. And may her bridegroom bring her to a house where all's accustomed ceremonious. It's an incredible rhyme. Ceremonious and house, they don't really rhyme, but visually they do, and you know that they belong together. But the fact that they don't go very well together might say something about the challenge of making a house ceremonious. Ceremonious. Right? So look at the impure rhymes. Look at the rhymes that don't quite work. There's something very fascinating there. Again, you have to assume when you read poetry that every single choice is there for a reason. That there's no way that there'd be one single comma or anything else out of place. In particular, in the traditional poetry. Now, again, it's fun to work in the 20th century, as I mostly do, because if you get to know somebody like Allen Ginsberg, one of the truly great American poets, one of the truly great poets in the language, he would read his poetry, and you can hear him reading it online because it was recorded. And virtually every single time he reads a poem, he reads it somewhat differently, and he skips lines and he adds words. Absolutely amazing. Because amazing in the sense that the tradition would have it that you've got this perfect urn, and you must talk about each comma and each line and each breath and it's all there for a reason. But Ginsberg, although he's an unbelievably beautiful craftsman of poetry, will allow himself to change the poems almost every time he reads them. That is not the case with Yeats. We would get severely punished where I studied if you made a mistake transcribing a poem before you analyzed it. It was akin to doing violence to the poem, as I'm sure a lot of you had. And I should mention, I've mentioned this perhaps briefly, but the reason for that you can blame on Vanderbilt, as you probably know. This method of reading, it comes from Vanderbilt. And it's something that we can be, I think, duly proud of. The new critical method that underwrites this kind of very formalistic reading that takes the text as a kind of perfect work that you need to in a sense, elevate and understand, comes from the new critics who were here. And it became the standard method of reading for decades, and in fact, arguably still is. I mean, we've gone through different phases of deconstruction and so forth and so on. But it's hard to not want to just say what is here and what is beautiful about it. It's like a good, loving relationship, I think. You fall in love with your poem. And may her bridegroom bring her to a house where all is accustomed ceremonious, for arrogance and hatred are the wares peddled in the thoroughfares. Which is, again, interesting. Politically, this is not the hoity-toity, aristocratic, there's scum over there. He's not like that, even as he does respect tradition and values and so forth. So you can feel ambivalent about him, but to look at the work, I think, explains his politics well. And then, of course, the question, how but in custom, and in ceremony, just stay with the 11, are innocence and beauty born. His two favorite words, innocence and beauty. It's amazing. It's all the way through the corpus. Innocence is also another one that we should briefly name, since it's so important to him. One of the goals of poetry is to teach you to look at the world as being strange. Estranyen, as the formalists said in Russia. Poetry takes that which is recognizable and known and makes it strange, in the same way that drugs do. It's why both of them are illegal. We're allowed to read the poetry that puts us to sleep, but not the radical stuff. We're allowed to take the drugs that put us to sleep, but not the fun stuff. It renders the world strange, so that you see the world through innocent eyes. It's as though you see the world for the first time. That's the goal in poetry. It is very present in the Romantics, who stand on cliffs and who spin around very quickly, and then the world spins and so forth, so that you get away from the habitual. So there's another interesting contradiction in Yeats's work, which is on the one hand, the celebration of the habitual and the traditional and the values, but on the other, the celebration of innocence. Innocence as in this wide-eyed, wow, I've never seen this world before, it's amazing. Ceremony is a name for the rich horn, and custom for the spreading laurel tree. So beautiful. And of course, we don't need to belabor this by now, but and custom for the spreading laurel tree. And you end the poem with the root of the poem, right? You end it with it spreading out on the bottom, so you can kind of imagine this poem has become a kind of tree. And if we're about to move into the tower, and of course the tower is a man-made tree. As it were, rooted, tall, you ascend, and so forth. He then later does for his son what he did for his daughter, but in a sense it's a little bit closer to a description of the modern world and the risks that it poses, and is a little bit less rooted than what we've seen, but nonetheless, and again I keep insisting upon this today, all the themes that we name in this course keep coming back all the time. It's one of the great joys of reading this stuff. Bid a strong ghost stand at the head, that my Michael may sleep sound, nor cry, nor turn in the bed, till his morning meal come round. And may the departing twilight keep all dread afar till morning's back, that his mother may not lack her fill of sleep. Bid the ghost have sword and fist. Some there are, for I avow, such devilish things exist, who have planned his murder. For they know of some most haughty deed or thought that waits upon his future days, and would through hatred of the bays bring that to naught. Though you can fashion everything from nothing every day, and teach the morning stars to sing, you have lacked articulate speech to tell your simplest want, and known wailing upon a woman's knee. Oh, God, I tell you. There's obviously magic in here, and I'm happy about that. It's just, it needs to manifest itself at the right times. Wailing upon a woman's knee, all of that worst ignominy of flesh and bone. And when through all the town there ran the servants of your enemy, a woman and a man, unless the holy writings lie, hurried through the smooth and rough, and through the fertile and waste, protecting till danger passed with human love. This is a fascinating, I think, juxtaposition, because he's naming in a sense, for her, he's naming the protection that she needs. For him, he names the risks that are posed in the future, in part through his own actions that he has not yet committed. So the poem is trying to protect him against the actions that he himself will eventually commit. And you also notice that, in a sense, we're both talking about a child, but also this insistent discussion or talking about poetry itself. Though you can fashion everything from nothing every day and teach the morning, I always like to transcribe these things, but it builds character, but it also makes mistakes. That morning stars to sing, you have lacked articulate speech to tell your simplest want, and known wailing upon a woman's knee, all of that worst ignominy of flesh and bone. There is both the description of a child who can invent the world. The child sees, presumably experiences the world as magical and can invent it as he wishes in this case, but is also completely subjected to the risks and perils of the world. He's completely vulnerable as a human being until later. So it's an interesting contrast, I think, to the Prayer for the Daughter. This is a far less frequently read poem, but I think we need to read them together to understand a little bit of the project. Then, as we complete our laying out of the themes of this course, we now enter into the tower and its obsessive interest in preserving what it is that we've been talking about today. So the first one that we will look at is possibly, I'm sure that you've all read this poem, possibly his most famous. I think among school children and Sailing to Byzantium are probably the two most famous poems. If we read them, as you can tell, I'm ordering them, first of all, I'm doing it chronologically, because I think in Yeats's world you have to. Yeats is aging and goes through stages in life. It would be a mistake, I think, to read it out of order if we're doing something like this, a course like this. But reading them the way I do, you'll see that there are particular themes that come out that are particularly dear to me. So here, we've gone from trying to figure out what you need to do for your children to trying to figure out how to maintain meaning permanently. So the answer to that question is family. The answer to that question is tradition. The answer to that question is the tree. The answer to that question is the spreading laurel tree, the roots, and so forth and so on. Those are the answers. And the answer is also that you have to establish meaning and truth as you can in the world while you're alive, so as to leave something that makes sense for the future. You try not to leave destruction, unless you're a current politician, but you try to create things that are going to be there for the future. But it's problematic, and for a poet, if you wish to have the voice that remains, it's deeply problematic. So he comes out with a statement that I'm sure you've read, but in this regard maybe sounds different. Sailing to Byzantium. So he's sailing backwards in time. That is no country for old men, period. That is no country for old men. That's it. That is no country for old men. That's it. You've never seen a statement like this in Yeats. He stops it. He's not even at the end of the line yet. That's it. We're done. That's the problem. What is the rest of the place like? Well, the young in one another's arms. Now, of course, we saw them dreaming about colored ribbons. Now they're in one another's arms, birds in the trees. Those dying generations. Oh, whoops, I'm the old man who knows stuff. Those dying generations, at their song, the salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas, fish, flesh, or fowl commend all summer long, whatever is begotten, born, and dies. Caught in that sensual music, all neglect, monuments of unaging intellect. Like a warning. This retirement age ought to be abolished. That's why it's good to work at a place like this where there isn't one. You finally figure out, I've mentioned this before, but I'm not from this country, and this is an enormously complicated country. Living in this country is, because we just, you get a card and you go to the hospital. I'd never seen money in hospital and the same thing. You're born and you get like a few little documents and then you're just taken care of. It makes, it's simple. Here, applying for college here, you apply for college, it's like 3 questions. Do you want to go to college? Here's a few places, which one you want, sign here, and then you go to college. And the colleges are amazing. It's very simple. Okay, McGill, Concordia, University of Montreal. And of course, you never leave Montreal. Why would you, right? Obviously, you're in Montreal. Here, oh my God. just keeping your car on the road is complicated. It's so, I mean, it's just complicated. I don't know how you do it. So you finally figure it out, you know, and you're 111 years old, and you finally know how to fill out the application for SAT scores or something. And nobody listens to you. It's the weirdest thing. So I don't know if he was talking about America. I don't think so. But for me, we have to respect the unbelievable effort that we have all made to figure out how the hell to live here. So this is his problem. Finally, you know, he's old enough to have the knowledge that one accumulates with age. But then there's this problem that your body becomes, well, he calls it a coat in one poem. But here, an aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick. Unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing, for every tatter in its mortal dress. Nor is there a singing school, but studying monuments of its own magnificence. And therefore, I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. Forget this. It is too hard. Right? I'm going to sing all of the marks on my body, all of the scars, all of my... But maybe there's another method here. Maybe there's O sages standing in God's holy fire, as in the gold mosaic of a wall, come from the holy fire, burn in a gyre, and be the singing masters of my soul. Consume my heart away, sick with desire, and fastened to a dying animal, it knows not what it is, and gather me into the artifice of eternity. Okay? Why? Because that is no damn country for old men. That's why. So I need to be fastened to something. Right now I'm fastened onto this tattered, decaying body. I want to be somehow fashioned instead into eternity. That's my goal. Now again, this is about poetry. True poetry is eternal. It lasts. It does what we're doing today. It constantly reinvigorate it. So he's talking about himself, and he's talking about the lines. So how do you do it? Once out of nature, I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing, but such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make of hammered gold and gold enameling to keep a drowsy emperor awake, or set upon a golden bough to sing to lords and ladies of Byzantium of what is past, or passing, or to come. What could be more traditional than the image of the bird as the image of poetry? But also this is a golden bird done in enamel, and it's beautiful, and it's fashioned, and it's eternal. And you got the drowsy emperor who, you know, he's being kept awake by the bird as a king might be kept awake by his fool. And he's going to become that bird. And he sings of what is past, passing, or to come. So we've talked about problems and solutions. The problem is I'm in nature. That's my problem. Because nature is cyclical, and therefore I'm going to decay. The solution is artifice. So the solution also, in the same way that the solution, since we can't be trees, is to erect a tower and to live in it, the solution for him is to take things out of nature and to make them solid and lasting and hammered out of gold. Which is an interesting contradiction, because we've seen in my prayer for my daughter that you want to make her like nature. You want to make her like a spreading laurel tree. But you also want to make her eternal and therefore consistent with human values. He talks a lot about human values here. So it's contradictory and interesting in the way that the Romantics are contradictory and interesting. In the case of the Romantics, you have Wordsworth saying, we should all just be like children. We just need to see the world anew. And he says it in language that a child wouldn't understand to save his or her life. So it's impossible. What do you mean? And he says, you should just be pastoral, live on the farm and dance. You dance and you make love and you make dinner and you go to sleep. And that's the perfect life, he says, as he laboriously writes that down after having, contemplated the history of poetry since the beginning of time. These contradictions are ever present in poetry. Well, here you got another one. This idea of I want to be natural. I want to accord my life with the tree, on the one hand. But in order to do so, I need to craft this bird and then turn into it. Now, the other bird that I would want to mention here is the bird from the poem that I'm sure you all know, Ode to a Nightingale. Unimaginably beautiful poem. And in that case, the speaker listens to the nightingale and says, what the hell are you doing? I mean, why are you so beautiful? You have to ask this question all the time of birds. What are you doing? A, you're beautiful. B, you're like singing. C, for no particular reason. You're just amazing. For no reason, you're just amazing. Bizarre. You're just singing. Okay, that's awesome. You talk to the bird. So in Ode to a Nightingale, he thinks and it dreams and then in a sense becomes the bird. And then the bird flies away and he realizes that the bird represents his imagination. Here, that's not enough. It's in that regard that this is another very modern poem. It's not enough to become a bird. In the modern world, you've got to fashion the thing. Just like it's not enough to mention the tower, in the modern world, you've got to buy the damn thing and then move into it. And that's exactly what we'll do now. So now we're going to move in. Now we'll move in. And again, deeply autobiographical. My house. I'm going to tell you about my house. And I feel very strongly about this because we just bought a house. And we're no longer living on campus. We've bought a farm with birds and spreading laurel trees. And I bought as much damn land as I could afford. All I can see is Marcia and the birds, and I couldn't be happier. An ancient bridge and a more ancient tower. A farmhouse that is sheltered by its wall. An acre of stony ground where the symbolic rose can break in flower. Old ragged elms, old thorns innumerable, the sound of the rain or sound of every wind that blows, the stilted water hen crossing the stream again, scared by the splashing of a dozen cows. A winding stair, a chamber arched with stone, a gray stone fireplace with an open hearth, a candle and written page. Il Penseroso's Platonist toiled on in some like chamber, shadowing forth how the demonic rage imagined everything. Benighted travelers from markets and from fairs have seen his midnight candle glimmering. 2 men have found it here. A man at arms gathered a score of horse and spent his days in this tumultuous spot, where through long wars and sudden night alarms his dwindling score and he seemed castaways, forgetting and forgot. And I, that after me my bodily heirs may find, to exalt a lonely mind, befitting emblems of adversity. So beautiful. So he buys the damn tower and the acre of stony ground. Why? Why do you buy the acre of stony ground? So that the rose will grow. That's why you buy the acre of land. And you know from reading Dante that when you get to Paradiso, it's a bunch of white roses, right? The rose being the image of eternality and perfection. But he actually says it. Here's why I bought the land, okay? It's written right here. I bought it so that the symbolic rose can break in flower. No, not even the rose. He actually just says it. It's right there. I bought this to the symbolic rose. And then you notice here the emphasis upon certain adjectives. Old ragged elms, old thorns, right? And then also later on, stony seems to come and kind of hold the whole place up. An acre of stony ground, the stones being these sort of images of the eternal world. So this is his project. And as we now move into the tower, of course, he's named it in many different ways, and we've talked about this in many different ways. But now he names it very, very clearly. And then he says, okay, well, who else has lived here? Who else has been here? Well, there is this place, and he chose very carefully, and he paid a fortune for it, 60 pounds, I think it was. The person who was here before was a warrior. A man-at-arms gathered a score of horse and spent his days in this tumultuous spot. So he also allies himself with a previous kind of warrior, some neo-aristocratic class. So there's two people who have lived here in his mind. Of course, that's silly, but that's okay. Two people have lived here, this warrior and himself. So, we mentioned the strangeness of this. Just think about how strange this is as a thing to do. Galilee is not near anything. If you go to, has anybody been there? Have you been there? It's not near anything in particular, but he does it because that's where the eternal world's going to lie, and that's where meaning and symbolism will rest. So we'll look next time at some images, but I did want to leave some time for questions. Yeah.
James Joyce, I've always wondered why he told Yeats when he met him in his 20s, I have nothing to learn from you. You can't help teach me anything. Was it because Yeats wrote in the style of Keats and Shelley and Bryan and Tennyson?
Well, it would certainly make sense. Joyce and Pound, who Yeats knew well, represented, of course, a break from tradition. But I mentioned this before, it always strikes me as being so interesting. When Yeats becomes a senator in the Irish state, he defends Joyce. As you know, Joyce was attacked and his work was subjected to censorship. But Yeats, again, that's why I think his politics are so interesting. He doesn't say burn all of Joyce's books. He says, that may not be my thing, and I'm not so sure I get it, but we need to protect it. And again, it's an interesting take on conservatism. Conservatism has become something quite vicious, I think. But conservatism from this perspective is maintaining values, including protecting the values of people who want to speak, as opposed to saying there's only one thing you're allowed to say. So yeah, I think that's an interesting relationship. Yeah.
Is Ireland the only country that has a writers' museum?
Oh, and a beautiful one. Yeah, I don't know of others. There's probably, I'm guessing, there's probably in Latin America. I can imagine them being in Mexico, for example. But it's true. And you've been, isn't that an amazing place? Yeah. There's a writers' museum in Dublin that is astonishing. There's also the Yeats exhibit that you can see online that's incredibly beautiful. It's hard to, I had trouble understanding why there is such this renaissance in Ireland of writers around this period. And then you go there and you sit around the coal fire and you drink whiskey, and like, oh, obviously. Obviously. The weather's so horrible most of the time. And there's, it's an incredibly beautiful and amazing place. And then you've got these coal fires, which I had never really seen. I mean, we had all these coal fireplaces in our home that we weren't allowed to light. You can carry guns into parks, but you can't light your own damn fireplace. But then you sit around and you're like, wow, this is kind of awesome, with the whiskey, obviously.
In prayer for my daughter, I couldn't help but think of Shakespeare's crafting of the speech by Polonius.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering whether he had in mind here talking to a literal daughter, or whether it was his thinking about Ireland, the country that he'd like this to be.
Yeah, I mean, with him, it's always about writing. It's almost always about Ireland, something he shares with Joyce, by the way. Joyce writes the greatest poem about Dublin, story about Dublin, and he does it in Trieste. It's like he never really left. And Yeats, despite all ideas to the contrary, did not spend an enormous amount of time in these places. He seems to. I mean, he wrote himself into them. But he actually spent a lot of time in London. He spent a lot of time all over the place. But is he talking? Yeah, and he's so conscious and aware at this time of the forming of the modern Irish state and the horrible, brutal imperial past and imperialist past of England and so forth. So, yeah, I think that, and he's also involved in the revival of the Gaelic language. So he's very much attuned to what it would take to keep a. I come from a place where when in 1976 there was this kind of second silent revolution when the Parti Québécois came to power. On the license plates, it used to be La Belle Province, the beautiful province, right? And then it became Je me souviens, I remember. You're like, well, what do you remember? When the Native Americans ran the place? Is that what you remember? No. No, I remember when this place was French, France. Before they lost the damn war. That's what I remember. Je me souviens. And he is remembering. Remembering is a big part of his task. So as he looks at his daughter, yeah, it's hard to not imagine he's thinking of the nascent state. It makes perfect sense. Sure. Yeah.
So I took this book out of the library that other people have. It's the Richard Finnerman edition.
Yep.
When you read some of these poems, there seem to be some
Variation.
significant differences in words and punctuation. What?
Some of that might be my fault from type, because I still have this terrible habit of typing, and some of it was different editions, revised, revisions subsequently and so forth, so, yeah.
Yeats revises.
Yeah, Yeats, and you know, Yeats and I think Shaw is maybe the great example of this. If you look at the actual manuscripts, there's spelling mistakes, there's all sorts of things, so editors undoubtedly have a role here as well. We could compare, I have another volume that maybe we could look at, but
Yeah, some
yeah.
of the old mothers, when I'm
One in particular, yeah. The publishing industry has this kind of control sometimes, and in a time when Shaw was interested in renovating the language. Yeats was not into that, but he was. I do like to think of him as going through the world gathering images and not necessarily paying particular attention, even though I'm insisting that we do as we read it. So, yeah. Any other questions about this? So what we've done here is we've gone from the crazy, mystical, wild, image-seeking Yeats to the very, again, small c conservative, 18th century conservative that he is, the kind of von Humboldt version of conservatism. And we've talked about that politically, but also in terms of the writing. And now as we look into the tower, you'll see these themes emerging very strongly, but alongside the theme of how the hell are we supposed to grow old? How is that supposed to happen? Like, where's the recipe book for that one? That's very present in here.
Did I hear you say at the beginning that you find it hard to read other people's poetry since you started reading Yeats?
It's hard to understand what their project is. And I say that in particular. I landed up by accident, by accident. I'm in the Department of French and Italian, and I oversee the modernist collection of French works at the Bandy Center. So Verlaine and Rimbaud, Apollinaire, and so forth and so on. And they seem like these jewels of wisdom and knowledge that we looked at briefly in the first class. And a lot of them are quite short. And it's not entirely clear what the broad project. Rimbaud, maybe the broad project is clear because he wrote for such a short amount of time. But what's the broad project of Verlaine, for example? It's I think, difficult. So that I'm sort of making it in that
Had you
contrast.
ever read Gerard Manley Hopkins?
Yeah.
You don't get his project?
Oh, I'm not saying people don't have projects. Most poets have projects. But I'm saying that this one is so cohesive
Oh, yeah.
and so coherent
Yeah.
that, you know, and if you do, let's say, another example might be reading poetry in the modern world. Where do you all read poetry? In the New Yorker. And you're like, oh, okay, here's an image here, and here's another image here, and here's one style, and here's another style, and you're like, okay, I don't know how to root this damn thing. I don't know where it's coming from. It's interesting, it's great, and I can hear it, and so forth, and I can look the person up. But you do feel like it's coming, that it's addressing everything in the world. You never have that feeling with Yeats, and partly because he was born an old soul, I think also. At least that's the way I feel. So.
Okay, that's a good place for us to end. How about a nice hand for Professor Barsky?